Hello, this presentation is an introduction to Read-Alouds. My name is Melissa Grabbert. I am the Director of Educational Outreach for WQPT PBS. You might recognize some of the characters here from our educational programming for children. This presentation will focus on three key ways to use a read-aloud. Of course, there are more than three, many more than three, but we're going to focus on these three first. First one is focusing on foundational skills. Second is focusing on making connections. And third, focus on storytelling elements. Before we get started, I also wanted to review our understanding of the different types of books that you might see in a school classroom or school library. One type of book you might see is an interactive book. These are really fun books because they allow the children listening to participate in some way, to interact in some way, maybe by touching the book or making a sound based on what's happening in the book. Another type of book you might see is a repetitive book. This book will have repeated sentences or sounds throughout the book, which allow students to participate in joining in the read aloud as they learn the repetition, as they learn the repeated sounds and words. Another really fun type of book is a wordless book. These are books, as they sound like, do not have words, but instead they have amazing illustrations that tell a very interesting story. All of the books we've looked at so far would be considered picture books because they have really great illustrations that help support the story. Some books we just call picture books because they have a story supported by pictures and illustrations. Another type of book that you will see often in a classroom will be what's called a leveled reader. These are books that usually go with maybe the curriculum that's used, the program that's used for teaching language arts, like MyView. So you might see books that look like this or books that look like this that have different reading levels listed. A leveled reader would be a book that you would try to match to whatever current ability the student has for reading. These books could be read independently by the student on their own, or most often read with some help from an adult. No matter what kind of book you're using for a read aloud, there are different ways, different things you can focus on. The first thing that we're going to look at is focusing on foundational skills. So these are things like syllables, or rhyming, or beginning, middle, and ending sounds. Okay, so focusing on those basic foundational skills that all students need in order to become great readers. So here's an example from a book called We Are Going on a Leaf Hunt, which also happens to be an interactive book because students can follow along and do some actions and interact with the book as you are reading it. You might say something like this when you come to this page. You might say, when I read this next page, listen for the word that rhymes with ball. So you would read, we're coming to a mountain, a tall, tall mountain. And you would talk with students about how the word tall rhymes with ball. So that would be focusing on the foundational skill of rhyming. Here's another example. You would start, in this case, by reading the page first. And this is from a silly book called I Will Not Read This Book. It says, I will not read this book, even if you hang me upside down by one toe over a cliff while tickling my feet. You might say to students, on that page, there were two words with the t sound. Let's see if we can find them. And together you would find the word toe and tickling, because those words start with the t sound. And one other example You might start by showing the front cover of a book, and you would say, let's count the syllables in the title of this book, The Grouchy Ladybug. And then however you normally count syllables, maybe by clapping or putting your hand under your chin to count how many times your mouth is moving. The Grouchy Ladybug. That's 7 syllables. So if you'd like to practice this strategy for read-alouds, you could grab a book and find a page with at least 2 sentences, and then decide what you want to focus on. Maybe you want to find a rhyming word, or maybe you want to help students count syllables. You could use a prompt, like, when I read this next page, listen for, on that page we just read, did you notice? Or let's count the syllables. As students are responding, as they are sharing their answers, you would want to provide a thinking-based sentence frame for students, like, I think blank rhymes with blank, or the word blank has blank syllables. Another thing to keep in mind anytime that you're having students share their thinking is making sure that all students have a chance to share, have a chance to practice speaking. One way to do this is using something called Think, Pair, Share. This gives students a time first to think about their answer. Then, even if you're in a small group, you could pair them up. So have them meet with a partner for a short amount of time. During that time, they're sharing, I think blank rhymes with blank. And then the other student, I think blank rhymes with blank. So they're taking turns speaking and listening. And then if you also have time, you can then have students share with the larger group. Again, this is a way to make sure that all students have a chance to share their thinking. Our next focus for using a read aloud is making connections. So this is a way to take, kind of like taking a step back from the book and helping students understand how the book connects to their lives. And the next few slides will show us a type of thinking about this that comes from the work of a woman named Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. And she taught that books can be thought of as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors. And what this means is that books can be different things to different students. Books can be a window, right? When we look out of a window, we see something outside of ourselves. And so a book that is a window book helps us understand people and cultures and places and experiences that are different than our own. And this can help us understand each other and build empathy for each other. Another way to think about a book is to think of it as a mirror. So, of course, when we look in a mirror, we see ourselves. So books that are mirrors help students see themselves in the story or in the characters. They feel valued and represented by what they see in the book because it looks like them, or it sounds like them, or they have the same experience as they do. So here are a few examples from some books that happen to be wordless picture books. This first one shown here is from a wordless picture book called Hike. So you might share with students an example like, this book is a window for me because I learned something new that I have never experienced before. And that is when you go rock climbing, you have to wear a helmet to be safe. So I've never experienced that. So I learned that like looking through a window into someone else's life in this book. Another way to make a connection to a book is to think of it as a mirror. So here's an example from a book called Brave Molly, another wordless picture book. So you might say to students, this book is a mirror for me because I see myself in this character, because I too have felt nervous about making new friends. So I know what it's like for Molly in this book. It's like looking in a mirror. The other way to look at books that we saw back here, that we're not going to go into much detail, but it's thinking of books as a sliding glass door. And that's almost like reading a book that takes us to a faraway place and uses our imagination. So it's not exactly a mirror or a window. It's almost like a door to another world. If you'd like to practice making connections, you can grab a book and find a page that you think students would be able to make a good connection to. Again, you can use these examples, these sentence starters, to help students. This is a window because, or this is a mirror because. Again, you can give students a chance to think, pair, and share about the connections that they make. The last focus we're going to take a look at is using a read aloud to teach about storytelling elements. Storytelling elements are things that students are taught to pay attention to starting at their earliest age, right? When we first start sharing books with students, we can talk about these things. Students continue using these storytelling elements all the way into adulthood, really, as they read stories and pay attention to these key elements. Characters, which are the people, animals, or objects in the story. These examples we're going to see here are from, of course, the classic Three Little Pigs story. Another important element of a story is the setting. So that is the place or the time where the story is happening. Another important part to pay attention to in a story is the problem. So that is something special, something in the story that happens that needs to be fixed in some way. And then, of course, every problem, we try to find a solution, right? How do the characters solve the problem? Every great story has a problem and solution. And another element that you often talk about with older students as they continue in elementary school is the theme or the lesson that they learn from the story. That is often something that you take away from the story that you can apply to your own life. So maybe in the story of the Three Little Pigs, the theme is about how we can work together to solve a problem, right? Even though we're not in the story, we're not the three little pigs, right, fighting the big bad wolf, but we can still learn something from the story, and that is the theme. So what might this look like in a read aloud? Well, you might share a book like you see here. This is Field Trip to the Moon, another wordless picture book. And so you might talk about the characters. You might say, a character in this book shown here reminds me of my nephew, because just like this character, he likes to take his crayons and paper wherever he goes. Right? So paying attention to what the characters are doing and saying and feeling. Another storytelling element that we want to think about is the problem in the book. So again, using the same book, you might share with students and say, I'm thinking the problem might be that this child is left on the moon with aliens. That's a pretty big problem. When you're thinking about the story and all the parts of the story, an important thing to think about, of course, is the pictures. You can use the pictures to help you understand the story. And in this picture, we might notice that this alien has made a drawing of the Earth. That's kind of interesting as we understand the story. If you wanted to practice storytelling elements, you could grab a book and look through the pages to notice what part of the story you want to talk about. You can decide what you want to focus on. Maybe it's the characters, the setting, the problem solution. As you're sharing this with students, of course, you always want to model, show them how to use sentence frames, show them how to use the words to share their ideas. So they might say, a character in this book reminds me of because, or I'm thinking the problem might be, when I look at the pictures, I notice. And finally, with all of these ways that we are using read-alouds and helping students understand what they're reading and use language to communicate, to speak, and to listen about what they're learning in the book, there are a couple other scaffolds or support that you always want to keep in mind, even before reading, doing some kind of picture walk where you're looking at the photographs and the illustrations before you even read to help students understand the story. And as we've already looked at, you could keep those sentence frames right there in front of students whenever they're sharing to make sure they have those words, those sentences to help them share their ideas.